I used to think being the youngest was like being a spare key, kept around, rarely trusted, always compared to the master copy. Tom was the master copy. Tom walked early. Tom lettered in 3 sports. Tom got a watch from Dad with "Aim Higher" engraved on the back. I got hand-me-downs that still smelled like his cologne and a yearly performance review at Thanksgiving. Tom would have done it faster. Tom wouldn't argue. Tom, Tom, Tom. Like a weather report you can't switch off. It was my birthday. David's in the family calendar because my mother once said it wrong and never corrected it. A glitch with a grudge. I was icing a cupcake for myself because I'd outgrown parties, apparently, when the phone lit up. Mom. I put her on speaker and kept swirling the frosting, practicing neutrality. "Sweetie," she sang, already breathless with good news that wasn't for me. "We did something exciting. Your father and I are giving Tom $100,000 for a down payment. Isn't that wonderful?" I tapped the knife against the bowl to keep from laughing. "On my sorry, David's birthday? It's not about you," she said gently, like a doctor about to say amputation. "It's about timing. The market's hot. Tom's ready. You understand." I understood a lot in that moment. I understood that the cupcake was sinking in the middle, and I didn't care. I understood that Dad's cough in the background meant he was there, co-signing the ritual. I understood, with the clarity of a fire alarm, that the role I was supposed to play, grateful understudy, applause machine, was killing me by inches. "Cool," I said, because my vocabulary collapses under emotional avalanches. "What am I getting?" A pause. Paper rustled. "Well," she said, "we support you in spirit." "Spirit doesn't split rent," I said. My voice didn't even shake. "Progress?" Dad finally spoke. "Be a team player, David." I looked at the single candle I'd jammed into the cupcake and pictured myself blowing out the last of my self-respect. I said. "I'm just changing teams." I hung up. No dramatic speech, no cinematic thunderclap. I put the phone face down, washed the knife, and ate the cupcake over the sink like a raccoon. Then I opened my contacts, scrolled to family, and hit mute all. I didn't block them. I didn't announce boundaries. I just stepped sideways out of the frame. 10 minutes later, the power flickered and a siren wailed outside. A transformer blew 3 blocks over. The building shook like it was agreeing with me. When the lights steadied, my inbox pinged. A client I'd been chasing for 6 months wanted a Rush logo package, double rate for a 48-hour turnaround. Attached was a sketch that looked suspiciously like a phoenix. I laughed. Not the bitter kind. The startled, relieved kind that leaves your ribs feeling newly rented. I texted Tom a single line, "Happy house hunting," then turned off read receipts. My hands didn't tremble. My chest didn't cave. It felt like finding a secret door in a room I'd lived in forever. I opened a new file, named it Start Here. AI, and began. The first week without them was eerily quiet. No texts about family updates. No passive-aggressive memes from Mom about grateful sons. No calls from Dad reminding me that discipline builds character. At first, I kept checking my phone out of habit. Some part of me expected a guilt trip to drop any minute. But the silence stretched on, not heavy or hostile, just empty. And I realized something wild. Emptiness isn't the same as loneliness. I started waking up without that knot in my stomach, the one that usually formed after reading Tom's latest success update. He'd just been promoted again, apparently. Tom's really making us proud. Mom's last text had read, the day before the call. I hadn't replied. Instead, I channeled my energy into the freelance gig that had landed in my inbox right after that phone call. It was a logo design job for a small eco-startup. Normally, I would have second-guessed every brushstroke, imagining Mom peering over my shoulder saying, "Tom would make it cleaner." But this time, it was just me, coffee, and a playlist of lo-fi beats. 2 days later, I sent the project off. The client replied with an all caps, "This is perfect," and a payment confirmation. Double what I expected. That felt like oxygen. I took myself out for ramen that night. A small celebration. Halfway through slurping noodles, my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in months. Susan. We'd met years ago in a design forum, collaborated once, and lost touch. "Hey stranger," her text read. "You still freelancing, or did you sell your soul to a corporation yet?" I grinned. "Still poor and free," I replied. That kicked off hours of messaging. We talked about clients, weird fonts, and why good coffee fixes most crises. She'd quit her agency job and was thinking about starting her own studio. Maybe we should team up sometime, she joked. I said yes before my brain could talk me out of it. Over the next few weeks, work picked up. One project turned into three into six. My inbox started to look like someone else's success story. I upgraded my software, repainted my apartment, and bought a proper desk chair. My life was becoming mine, not an audition for my family's approval. Then one night, while scrolling property listings with no real intention to buy, I saw it. A small patch of land on the outskirts of town. Overgrown, cheap, almost forgotten. But something about it grabbed me. I sent the link to Susan as a joke. Our future design empire headquarters? She replied, why not? I laughed, but her words stuck. The next day, we drove out there just to look. The road was rough, the fence broken, the trees half wild. But when the sun hit the clearing, it looked peaceful, like a blank canvas. The owner, an old man in a flannel shirt, came out to greet us. You folks buying or dreaming? He asked. I looked at Susan, and for the first time in my life, I didn't hesitate. Maybe both, I said. That night, lying in bed, I realized I hadn't thought about my family all day. Not once. The silence wasn't emptiness anymore. It was space. Space for something new to grow. And somewhere deep inside, that space started whispering, keep going. The land was only 3 acres, small, uneven, and half swallowed by weeds. But to me, it looked infinite. It wasn't the kind of place you bought to impress anyone. It didn't have lake access, or a perfect view, or even reliable Wi-Fi. But when Susan and I stepped out of the car that second morning, the air smelled like pine and rain-soaked soil, and I felt something loosen inside me. The old man, his name was Nick, met us again at the fence. Didn't think you'd actually come back, he said, grinning under a gray beard. Most people say they're interested, then ghost me like I'm a bad Tinder date. Susan laughed. We're serious this time. Nick raised an eyebrow. Serious enough to make an offer? I hadn't planned to, not really. My savings were barely enough for a deposit, and freelancing wasn't exactly a stable income. But when I glanced at Susan, her hair pulled back, eyes bright with that why not energy, I heard myself say, let's talk numbers. The negotiations were surprisingly human. No real estate agents, no contracts in triplicate, just 3 mugs of instant coffee, a scratched-up calculator, and Nick's stories about how the land used to be part of an orchard. By the time we left, we had a handshake deal and a 2-week window to pull the money together. Back in the car, Susan was practically bouncing. We're really doing this, aren't we? I guess we are, I said, still half in disbelief. Then we'll make it work, she said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. I didn't know then how much those words would come to mean. The next few weeks were chaos. I took every design gig I could find, logo revisions, book covers, even an ad campaign for a local brewery. Susan pitched clients for joint work, and somehow, it clicked. We weren't just collaborating, we were building something. Still, doubt kept creeping in at night. I'd lie awake thinking about my parents' faces if they knew, Dad shaking his head, Mom sighing that disappointed sigh that meant Tom wouldn't risk that. But for once, that thought didn't stop me. It fueled me. One evening, while finalizing a branding mock-up, my laptop froze and the screen went black. My heart stopped with it. I hadn't backed up my work for a week. I slammed the lid, cursed, opened it again, and to my utter shock, the screen lit up with an old photo. Me, at 12, sitting next to Tom at Christmas. He's holding his new drone. I'm holding the sweater Grandma knitted. Mom's behind us, smiling at him. I hadn't seen that photo in years. It was my old screensaver, somehow resurrected by a glitch. I stared at it for a long minute, then right-clicked and deleted it. Permanently. When the screen cleared, I felt lighter, like I'd just unclogged something spiritual. A few days later, the payment from a big client came through, enough to cover my half of the down payment. Susan called me screaming with joy. We signed the papers that Friday, officially becoming landowners. That night, we drove out there again. The stars were enormous, the world too quiet. Susan stood in the middle of the clearing and whispered, "This is going to be our start." And for the first time in my life, I believed someone when they said our. We toasted with gas station champagne under a half-broken moon. Somewhere far off, an owl called out. I didn't know if it was luck, fate, or just the universe finally giving me a turn, but standing there with dirt under my shoes and hope in my chest, I knew I'd finally stepped into my own story. The first morning after the papers were signed, I woke up before sunrise, too wired to sleep. The thought that I owned land, that something tangible in this world now had my name on it, kept looping in my brain like a song. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No handouts, no guilt, no comparisons. Just soil and sky that didn't care whose son I was. Susan and I drove out early, thermoses of bad coffee in hand. The clearing looked different now, no longer a what if, but a beginning. The grass glistened with dew, the trees swayed in that slow, approving way that makes you believe the world's rooting for you. We brought graph paper, measuring tape, and exactly zero construction experience. Our plan was a cabin, small, sustainable, minimalist. We'd build it ourselves with help from a friend of mine, Max, an architect who loved experimental projects and owed me a favor. Minimalist, huh? Max said when he saw the sketches Susan had doodled. You two are either visionaries or masochists. Probably both, I said. The first real shock came 2 weeks in, when the soil inspection revealed an issue. Old foundation stones buried underneath the lot, remnants of a structure that had burned down decades ago. You'll have to clear it or build around it, Max said. Most people would have seen that as a setback. But Susan, in her infinite optimism, said, what if we use it? Reclaim the bones of the old house. And that's what we did. We cleaned and stacked those charred stones, used them as the base for a fire pit. I didn't tell anyone, but the symbolism nearly broke me. Something ruined, rebuilt into warmth. Meanwhile, business was booming. My freelance work, once a desperate scramble, had become stable, even profitable. Clients started recommending me to others. Susan's reputation was growing too. We talked late into the nights about forming a real agency, something honest, creative, and ours. Then, one afternoon, while hauling lumber from the truck, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in months. Mom. I froze, hand on the tailgate. Susan glanced at me. You okay? Yeah. I lied, pocketing the phone. Just spam. But it wasn't spam. The voicemail that followed was short, almost uncertain. David, it's your mother. I heard from Tom that you bought some property. That's impressive. Call me when you can. I didn't call. Not that day, not that week. I told myself I was too busy, but the truth was, I didn't know which version of myself she expected to pick up. The dutiful son? The invisible one? Or the man I was trying to become? The one who no longer flinched at her voice? Instead, I threw myself into the build. Every nail, every brush of sawdust against my skin felt like a declaration. I exist on my own terms. Then, one night, while Susan and I were painting the cabin's first wall, a storm rolled in, fast and angry. The wind howled, rain pounded through the unfinished roof, and a bolt of lightning hit the field nearby. We grabbed our things and ran for the car, laughing and soaked. When the thunder finally softened, we sat inside with the heater blasting, dripping and breathless. Susan looked at me, eyes gleaming with adrenaline. You know, she said, some people would call us crazy. Some people, I said, don't know what freedom looks like. She smiled. Exactly. Outside, the storm tore across the land like it was cleansing it, like it was erasing everything that had ever tried to hold me back. And somewhere between the flashes of lightning, I realized, for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anyone's permission to be proud. By the time the cabin walls stood solid, summer had folded into early autumn. The air smelled of sawdust and pine resin, and every sunrise bled gold across the unfinished boards. It wasn't much yet. No insulation, no plumbing, barely any roof. But it was alive. Every creak, every uneven edge felt like part of a heartbeat we built with our own hands. Susan and I spent our days working, laughing, arguing over design choices. She wanted wide windows for natural light. I wanted smaller ones to save on cost. We compromised, floor to ceiling on one side, minimal on the other. Balance, she said, isn't about symmetry. It's about breathing space. I think she meant more than architecture. One afternoon, while setting beams with Max, I noticed something carved faintly into one of the old foundation stones we'd reused. W.H. 1963. Max said it must have belonged to whoever owned the land before the fire. The initial stayed with me, though I couldn't say why. Maybe because they proved someone else had dreamed here once, and maybe lost everything. It made me want to finish what they started. That week, Susan got an email from a magazine she'd pitched on a whim, a design publication looking to feature creative living projects. They wanted photos of our build and an interview. We laughed, thinking it was a scam at first. But after a Zoom call with an actual editor, it became real. "Guess we're officially artists now," Susan said, holding her phone like a trophy. "Or crazy people with decent lighting," I countered. Either way, it felt surreal. The feature went live 2 weeks later under the headline, "Two Designers, One Dream, Building Freedom from Scratch." The photos showed our muddy boots, unfinished beams, and our lopsided grins. The story blew up online. I started getting DMs from strangers, people who said they wished they had the courage to do the same. Then, like a ghost from another timeline, my mother's name popped up in my inbox. No hello, no small talk, just a single line. "We saw the article. Your father and I are proud of you." I stared at it for a long time. Not angry, not touched, just tired. Because the pride I'd once begged for now felt like currency from a country I no longer lived in. I didn't reply. Instead, I closed my laptop and stepped outside. The air was cold, crisp, and utterly silent. From the porch, the cabin looked like something out of a dream, unfinished, imperfect, but standing. That night, Susan and I built a fire in the pit made from those old stones. She curled beside me, wrapped in a blanket, her head on my shoulder. "You ever think about going back?" she asked quietly. "To my family?" "Yeah, just to. I don't know. Show them you're okay?" I stared into the flames. The wood cracked, sparks danced upward like tiny rebellions. "I used to think I needed to show them," I said. "Now I just am, and that's enough." She squeezed my hand, and for a long time we sat there listening to the wind in the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a car passed, a sound from the world I'd left behind. But out here, surrounded by everything I'd built from nothing, it felt small, far away. The cabin wasn't just a house. It was a boundary drawn in cedar and steel, a promise that I'd finally stopped living to be seen. And for the first time, the quiet didn't scare me. It felt like peace wearing new skin. Winter came early that year, heavy and sudden. The first snow caught us mid-project, halfway through sealing the roof seams. Susan stood outside, laughing as flakes collected in her hair, while I cursed softly, trying to keep the tarp from flying away. "Relax," she said. "The cabin's tougher than it looks." It was. So were we. The cabin held together through those first freezing nights. We borrowed a small wood stove from Max and slept on air mattresses under piles of mismatched blankets. It wasn't glamorous, but there was something sacred about it. Watching our breath swirl in the cold, hearing the stove pop and sigh like it was alive. Then, one morning, I found tire tracks in the fresh snow. Deep ones, stopping right by the front path. Susan noticed them too. "Expecting anyone?" she asked. I wasn't. A cold shiver ran down my spine. We hadn't given the address to anyone but Max and the editor. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just a lost hiker or delivery mix-up. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. 2 days later, while we were unloading supplies, I heard a car pull up again. This time, it wasn't a Phantom. A familiar silver SUV rolled to a stop by the edge of the clearing. Out stepped Tom, my brother. He looked exactly the same. Expensive coat, confident stride, the same half-smile that used to make teachers call him charming. I froze, hammer in hand, as he waved awkwardly. "Hey, little brother," he said, like we'd seen each other last week. Susan glanced at me, uncertain. I wiped my hands and walked over slowly. "What are you doing here?" "Mom sent me." He looked around, genuinely impressed. "She saw the article. Couldn't believe it was you." I bit the inside of my cheek. Nice to see she still talks about me in the third person. Tom laughed uncomfortably. "She just wanted to see how you're doing. I volunteered to check things out." "Check things out," I repeated, like I'm a potential investment. His face softened. "Come on, Dave. Don't do that. You've done something incredible here. Everyone's proud." "Now they're proud," I said. Funny how that works. Silence fell between us. The wind rattled the trees. Susan shifted behind me, but didn't speak. Tom sighed, glancing at the cabin. "Look, I didn't come to fight. I just wanted to see it. And maybe, to understand." Something in his voice cracked the old resentment just a little. Against my better judgment, I gestured toward the porch. "Fine, but wipe your shoes." He smiled, grateful, and followed me in. Inside, He ran his fingers along the wood beams, the half-finished counters. You built this. With my own hands, I said. No loans. No help. Tom nodded slowly. It's beautiful. Then, quietly, I didn't think you had it in you. I didn't know whether to laugh or throw him out. But instead, I just said, neither did I. Before he left, he asked if he could bring Mom and Dad to see it sometime. I didn't answer. That night, Susan and I sat by the fire again. You okay? She asked. I don't know, I said honestly. It's weird. I thought seeing him would make me angry. But it just felt like watching an old movie I'd outgrown. She leaned her head on my shoulder. Maybe that's growth. Maybe it was. Still, when I looked out the window and saw the SUV tracks fading into the snow, part of me wondered if ghosts ever really left, or if they just learned to knock more politely. It happened 3 weeks later, right when the snow began to melt into soft mud and the trees started whispering spring again. I was outside chopping firewood when I heard another engine on the gravel road. My gut clenched before I even turned. The silver SUV again. But this time, there were 2 figures inside. Tom stepped out first, as calm as ever. Then the passenger door opened, and out came my mother. For a second, I couldn't move. The sight of her, bundled in her pristine coat, eyes darting around the clearing like she was inspecting an exhibit, felt surreal. She looked smaller than I remembered, like the years had quietly folded her in. David, she called softly, almost tentative. You look well. I dropped the axe, wiped my hands on my jeans, and stood there. You shouldn't have come unannounced. Tom shifted awkwardly. I told her to wait, but you know Mom. I wanted to see it for myself, she said, scanning the cabin. Your brother said it was beautiful. I didn't believe him. I almost laughed. Of course you didn't. She flinched, but didn't argue. Instead, she walked toward the porch, her heels sinking slightly into the mud. You built this yourself? With some help, I said, nodding toward the cabin. Susan was inside, pretending to organize tools but clearly eavesdropping. Mom reached out, touched the wooden post by the stairs. It's solid, she murmured, almost to herself. Then she turned to me. You've done well, David. Those words, ones I'd chased my entire life, landed now like stones on water. They rippled, but they didn't sink in. Thanks, I said flatly. She hesitated. I know we haven't always seen you clearly. Your father and I, we thought we were doing what was best. Pushing you. I looked at her, and for once, didn't feel the urge to explain or defend myself. You weren't pushing me, I said quietly. You were erasing me. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. You're right, she said after a long moment. We were wrong. I was wrong. I didn't expect that. Not from her. The silence that followed was sharp and heavy. Even Tom looked uncomfortable, shuffling his feet like he wished he'd stayed in the car. Finally, she exhaled and added, Your father wanted to come, but he didn't know if you'd let him. I didn't answer. Maybe one day, she said softly. Then, as if remembering herself, she reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. We wanted to help. Not because you need it, she said quickly, but because we should have a long time ago. I didn't take it. Keep it, I said. You've already given enough to Tom. This, I gestured around at the cabin, is what I gave myself. She blinked rapidly, trying to hide tears. Tom put a hand on her shoulder, but she shook him off. Just know we're proud, she whispered. Truly. When they left, Susan came out and slid her arm through mine. You okay? I think so, I said, though my chest felt strange, hollow and full all at once. We stood there watching the SUV disappear into the trees. The tire tracks faded quickly under the drizzle, like they'd never been there. For the first time, I didn't feel the ache of rejection or the pull of wanting to prove anything. I just felt done. Peaceful even. Susan smiled softly. You finally got what you wanted. Yeah, I said. And it turns out, I don't need it anymore. That night, as the cabin's lights glowed warm against the dark woods, I realized something. Forgiveness doesn't always come as a grand gesture. Sometimes, it just arrives quietly, when you realize the ghosts no longer haunt the house you built for yourself. After that visit, life didn't exactly snap back to normal, but it started to settle. The air in the cabin felt lighter, like something invisible had finally been cleared out. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking around with that constant low hum of tension under my skin. Susan noticed it, too. You smile more now, she teased one morning while pouring coffee. It's weird. Kinda nice. We'd finished the cabin interior by then. Smooth pine walls, matte black fixtures, a wide desk under the biggest window for my design work. My workspace faced the forest. Sometimes I'd lose whole hours just watching the light change through the trees. Business was thriving. After the magazine feature, new clients poured in. A few even asked for designs inspired by the cabin aesthetic. Susan and I decided to make it official. We registered a small design studio together, Northline Creative. The logo was a simple compass, hand-drawn, imperfect. Mine. That first week after launch, we got a commission from a local architecture firm. When we went to meet them, I realized the lead architect was none other than Max's old professor, a man who once told me my portfolio lacked vision. Now he was asking me for advice. Funny how tables turn when you stop setting them for people who never offered you a seat. Around that time, Susan started sketching expansion ideas, tiny cabins for rent, maybe a creative retreat. At first, I thought it was a pipe dream, but the more she talked, the more it made sense. People wanted peace like this. Space to breathe. We drew plans late into the nights, our laptops glowing in the quiet cabin. You realize we're building a village, I said once. Not a village, she said. A refuge. Something about that word stuck. Then, one weekend, while clearing brush near the edge of the property, I found something unexpected, a rusted tin box buried under an old stump. Inside were bits of melted metal and a few half-burned papers. Most of it was unreadable, but one scrap survived, a fragment of handwriting that said, "Begin again. W. H. 1963. The same initials carved into the foundation stones. I stood there staring at it, feeling a strange kinship with whoever that was. Someone who'd built here before, lost it all, and left behind those two words. Begin again. That night, I placed the scrap in a small frame by the cabin window. Susan looked at it and smiled. Guess it's part of the story now, she said. She was right. Later, while we sat by the fire pit, I checked my phone out of habit and saw a new message, from Dad this time. Just a photo. It was my mother, standing in front of their house, holding a mug that said, "World's Best Mom." Underneath, he'd written, "She's trying, David. We both are." No apology. No expectations. Just effort. I didn't reply. Not yet. But for the first time, I didn't feel anger rise in my throat. Just warmth. Susan leaned against me, resting her head on my shoulder. "What are you thinking?" "About how far I've come," I said. "And how sometimes you have to burn everything before you can finally see the stars." She smiled at that. "Poetic. You should design greeting cards next." I laughed, but deep down, I knew this was more than design or business or family. It was about roots. The kind you plant yourself, knowing the ground might not be perfect, but it's yours. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. Spring arrived in full bloom, turning the clearing into a patchwork of green and gold. Wildflowers dotted the edge of the woods, bees hummed lazily around the porch, and the cabin, our cabin, finally looked finished. The scent of fresh wood and paint still lingered, but it already felt like home. Susan came up with the idea first. "We should have a housewarming," she said one evening, sprawled across the couch with blueprints on her lap. "Invite who?" I asked, half joking. "Friends. Max. Maybe your brother." I hesitated. "You mean the family who thinks I'm a miracle of unexpected competence?" She nudged me with her foot. "You don't have to forgive them to let them see what you built. Sometimes showing peace is louder than holding grudges." She was right, damn her. So we planned it. A casual gathering, bonfire, food, music. Max brought his partner and a cooler full of craft beer. A few of Susan's friends came, and to my surprise, so did Tom. He texted that morning, "Mom and Dad want to come too. Only if it's okay with you." I stared at that message for a long time before typing back, "It's fine. Just come as you are." When their car finally pulled up, I felt my heart stutter. My dad got out first, slower than I remembered, hair thinner, posture still soldier straight. My mom followed, clutching a basket like it was a peace offering. "David," she said, eyes wide as she took in the cabin, the lights, the laughter. "It's beautiful." For the first time, I believed she meant it. Susan met them at the porch, all warmth and calm. "Welcome," she said, guiding them inside. The tension I'd expected didn't come. Instead, there was a strange gentleness in the air, like everyone had silently agreed to stop pretending and start existing. Dad walked through the cabin slowly, touching the walls, inspecting every joint and beam. When he finally turned to me, there was something raw in his expression. "You did this yourself?" he asked quietly. "With help," I said. "But yeah." He nodded. I didn't think. His voice trailed off. Then, with a small, crooked smile, "I didn't think I'd ever see something like this. I was wrong about you, son." The words hit me like sunlight through clouds, soft, disorienting, a little too bright. Mom joined us, wiping at her eyes. "We didn't realize how much we hurt you," she said. "We thought we were teaching you to be strong, but we were only teaching you to disappear." I didn't know what to say. Years of anger and grief pressed against my chest, but for once, they didn't spill out. I just nodded. "I know." We went outside for the bonfire. The sky turned pink, then purple, then deep velvet blue. Tom passed around drinks. Susan roasted marshmallows with my mom, and Max played an old guitar he'd brought along. At one point, Dad sat beside me by the fire. We didn't talk much, just stared at the flames. Then he said, almost to himself, "You built something good here. Not just a house. A life." I swallowed hard. "Thanks." He nodded once. We should have seen it sooner. The flames crackled, throwing sparks into the night air. Later, as everyone drifted off to their cars and the laughter faded, I stood in the quiet clearing, watching the smoke rise toward the stars. Susan came up behind me, slipping her arms around my waist. "See," she whispered, "you didn't need revenge, just peace." And as the fire burned low, I realized she was right. I wasn't chasing their approval anymore. I was simply living. The cabin, the land, the love, all of it stood as proof that sometimes the best ending isn't triumph or payback. It's standing in the same place you once felt small and realizing you've outgrown it. Tomorrow, life would go on. The business would grow, the trees would bloom again, and maybe, just maybe, my family and I would find a new way to exist. Not as Golden Boy and Shadow, but as people. Flawed, learning, finally equal under the same wide sky. Weeks passed after the housewarming, and the world finally slowed down. The cabin smelled like coffee and pine instead of paint. My parents sent the occasional text, small things, nothing heavy. It felt normal. One evening, Susan and I sat on the porch, watching the sun melt into the treeline. The cabin glowed softly behind us, its windows reflecting everything we'd built. Our work, our peace, our second chances. "Do you miss them?" she asked quietly. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not the way I used to. It's different now. I don't need them to see me anymore." She smiled. "They see you, David. And more importantly, you see you." The wind moved through the trees, gentle and full of life. Somewhere an owl called, same as that first night months ago. I looked at the cabin, the fire pit built from old stones, the walls we raised, the light we made, and felt a calm that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. "I think," I said, squeezing her hand, "this is what peace feels like." Susan leaned against me, and together we watched the stars appear, one by one, over the home we built from nothing but faith, hard work, and the choice to begin again.